Don't react. Let that be the first promise you make to yourself as 2026 opens its quiet, unmarked door. Not because you are afraid, not because you are weak, but because you have learned, through tired nights and heavy mornings, that your peace is too expensive to be paid for with impulsive words and borrowed anger. There is a power in stillness that only the weary and the wise ever truly discover. You have lived long enough to know that every reaction costs you something. It costs you breath. It costs you clarity. Sometimes it costs you dignity, and the people who provoke you often walk away richer for it, carrying your energy like a trophy they did not earn. You do not owe everyone a response. You do not owe every insult a defense, every misunderstanding an explanation, every wound a scream. Silence is not surrender when it is chosen. Silence can be a boundary so firm that it needs no guard. In 2026, let your silence become intentional. Let it be clean and final, not bitter or loud. There are people who only feel alive when they can pull a reaction out of you, when they can shake your inner balance and watch you stumble. They are not interested in truth. They are interested in control. And control dissolves the moment you stop feeding it. There was a time when you believed that being good meant being available, that being kind meant enduring, that being strong meant staying and explaining and trying again. You bent yourself into smaller shapes so others could feel bigger. You swallowed your hurt so conversations could continue. You learned to smile while something inside you folded in on itself. But wisdom does not come from endless tolerance. It comes from discernment. It comes from knowing when love has turned into labor, when communication has turned into performance, when connection has turned into a slow erosion of self. Do not announce your exit. Do not slam doors. Do not give speeches about your worth to people who never listened when you whispered your pain. Cutting someone off silently is not cruelty, it is clarity. It is the moment you decide that access to you is a privilege, not a right. It is the moment you realize that you do not need closure from people who thrive on confusion. Some endings are meant to be quiet because they are not for the other person. They are for you. In 2026, let your growth be private. Let your healing be unannounced. The strongest transformations often happen away from the audience, in the small choices you make when no one is watching. When you choose not to reply. When you choose not to explain. When you choose not to chase understanding from someone who benefits from misunderstanding you. Every time you don't react, you reclaim a piece of yourself that was scattered in old arguments and unfinished conversations. There is a myth that silence means you have nothing to say. The truth is that silence often means you have learned exactly what to say, and you have decided it is not worth saying here. You have learned that some people hear words only as weapons or tools, never as bridges. You have learned that your energy is finite, that your time is sacred, that your nervous system remembers every unnecessary battle. Peace is not passive. Peace is a decision you make again and again, especially when provoked. You may feel the urge to explain yourself one last time. You may want to clear your name, to set the record straight, to make sure they finally understand. But understand this, people who are committed to misunderstanding, you will not be convinced by your best argument. They will only collect your words and twist them into something else. Silence denies them that material. Silence removes the stage. Silence starves the drama of oxygen. This does not mean you become cold or closed. It means you become selective. You learn to recognize who deserves your voice and who only deserves your absence. You learn that your softness is not meant for everyone. It is meant for those who handle it with care. Cutting someone off silently is an act of self-respect when staying requires you to abandon yourself. There is grief in this choice, and you should not pretend otherwise. Even when someone hurts you, letting go of them can ache like an old bruise pressed too hard. You may mourn the version of them you hoped they would become. You may mourn the future you imagined, the conversations you thought would happen, the apologies you thought would come. Allow that grief. It does not mean you are wrong. It means you are human, but do not confuse grief with regret. You can miss someone and still know that your life is lighter without them in it. You can love what was and still refuse to live in what is no longer healthy. In 2026, let yourself choose the quiet courage of walking away without a fight. Let that be the year you stop proving and start protecting. There is a dignity and restraint that cannot be taught, only earned. It is earned through disappointment survived, through lessons learned the hard way, through realizing that your worth does not increase when someone finally agrees with you. Your worth is not a debate. It does not need witnesses. It does not need validation from people who could not see you when you stood right in front of them. When you stop reacting, you will notice something surprising. The noise fades. The urgency dissolves. Your body begins to relax in ways it hasn't for years. You start sleeping better. You start thinking more clearly. You start hearing your own thoughts again instead of replaying arguments in your head. This is not accidental. Your nervous system has been waiting for you to choose safety over stimulation. Some people will notice your silence and try to provoke you harder. They will escalate, accuse, guilt, and bait you into responding. This is the moment your resolve is tested. Remember why you chose quiet. Remember the cost of every past reaction. Remember how often you walked away from conversations feeling smaller, drained, and ashamed of words you only said because you were pushed. You are not required to attend every argument you are invited to. Cutting someone off silently does not mean you harbor hatred. It means you refuse to participate in patterns that harm you. Hatred keeps you tethered. Silence sets you free. You are not punishing them, you are choosing yourself. And choosing yourself does not require permission. As 2026 unfolds, you will meet new people. You will build new rhythms. You will discover parts of yourself that were buried under constant emotional labor. You will laugh more easily. You will feel less on edge. You will notice how peaceful life can be when you are not constantly bracing for the next conflict. This peace is not fragile. It is built on boundaries. There is a quiet confidence that comes from knowing you can walk away. You no longer beg for understanding. You no longer chase apologies. You no longer explain your standards to people who benefit from ignoring them. You simply adjust your distance. You let your actions speak. You let your absence deliver the message you no longer need to say out loud. You may worry about being misunderstood. Let them misunderstand. Being misunderstood by those who never sought to understand you is a small price to pay for inner peace. History is filled with people who were misread, misjudged, and mislabeled, yet they lived truthfully anyway. Your life does not require universal approval to be meaningful. In this new year, measure success differently. Not by how many people like you, but by how deeply you like yourself when you are alone. Not by how well you argue, but by how rarely you need to. Not by how much you endure, but by how well you choose. Strength is no longer loud in your life. It is calm. It is grounded. It knows when to speak and when to leave. You are allowed to outgrow people without dragging them through your transformation. You are allowed to change without issuing a press release. You are allowed to disappear from spaces that demand the old version of you. Growth often requires distance. Healing often requires silence. When you don't react, you take your power back. You stop handing the steering wheel of your emotions to anyone who knows which buttons to push. You become the author of your responses, the guardian of your peace. And in that space, something sacred happens. You begin to trust yourself again. Let 2026 be the year you stop explaining your boundaries and start living them. Let it be the year you recognize that silence can be an answer, distance can be kindness, and walking away can be the most loving thing you do for yourself. You have spent enough time being accessible to chaos. Now it is time to be devoted to calm. Do not react. Cut them off silently, not out of anger but out of wisdom. Not to teach them a lesson, but to honor your own. And as you move forward, lighter and steadier, let your life speak for you. Let your peace be the proof that you chose well. Distance is a response when words have been disrespected, and this truth arrives slowly, often after you have spent too much time explaining yourself to people who were never listening. It comes after you have repeated your feelings in different tones, softer, clearer, kinder, hoping one version might finally land. It comes after you realize that the issue was never your communication, but their refusal to honor it. Words carry weight. They carry intention, vulnerability, and trust. When someone dismisses them, twists them, mocks them, or treats them as if they mean nothing, they are not just rejecting language, they are rejecting you. At first, you try patience. You tell yourself that understanding takes time, that people are complicated, that everyone deserves another chance. You stay in conversations that leave you drained, replaying them later in your mind, wondering how you could have said it better. You question your tone, your timing, your choice of words, not yet willing to question their willingness to care. There is a quiet hope inside you that respect can be taught through persistence, that if you remain calm and open, eventually your words will be met with the seriousness they deserve. But something shifts when disrespect becomes a pattern instead of a mistake. When your words are consistently minimized, interrupted, laughed at, or used against you, the emotional cost begins to show. You start feeling smaller in conversations. You hesitate before speaking. You feel the need to defend thoughts that once flowed freely. This is not growth. This is erosion. And no one should have to shrink in order to stay connected. Distance is not created out of cruelty. It is created out of necessity. It is what happens when communication stops being safe. When words are disrespected, silence becomes protection. When presence is taken for granted, absence becomes clarity. Distance allows you to breathe again without bracing yourself for misunderstanding. It gives you space to remember who you are when you are not constantly explaining yourself. There is a false belief that distance is immature, that walking away means you failed to resolve something. But resolution requires mutual respect. It requires two people who are willing to listen, to reflect, and to adjust. When only one person is doing that work, the imbalance becomes unbearable. Distance then is not avoidance, it is an honest response to an uneven exchange. It is acknowledging that dialogue without respect is just noise. You do not owe endless access to people who repeatedly disregard your voice. Your words are not disposable. They are an extension of your inner life. When someone treats them carelessly, they are showing you how they will treat your boundaries, your emotions, your time. Distance is the boundary that does not argue. It does not beg to be understood. It simply states without words that something is no longer acceptable. Often, distance is misunderstood by those who benefited from your closeness. They may accuse you of changing, of becoming cold, of pulling away without explanation. What they rarely acknowledge is how many explanations they were given before you ever stepped back. Distance is usually the final chapter of a long story of unheard words. It is what remains when conversation has been exhausted. There is grief in choosing distance. Even when it is necessary, it can ache. You grieve the connection you hoped for, the respect you expected, the ease you wished could exist. You grieve the version of the relationship that lived only in your effort. Distance asks you to accept reality as it is, not as you imagined it could be. That acceptance can be painful, but it is also grounding. With distance comes perspective. Away from constant dismissal, you begin to see clearly. You notice how often you compromised your comfort to keep peace. You notice how rarely your needs were centered. You realize that respect is not something you should have to negotiate for. It is either present or it is not. Distance gives you the clarity that constant engagement obscures. Distance also teaches others, not through punishment, but through consequence. When words are ignored, presence is reduced. When effort is dismissed, access changes. This is not revenge, it is alignment. People learn how to treat you by what you tolerate, but also by what you withdraw from. Distance communicates what arguments could not. Choosing distance requires courage. It means trusting your experience even when others invalidate it. It means standing by your feelings without demanding agreement. It means understanding that peace is more valuable than being right. Distance protects your emotional health in ways constant confrontation never could. There is strength in knowing when to stop speaking. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you have said enough. Distance honors your words by refusing to place them in spaces where they are not valued. It allows your silence to speak with integrity. Over time, distance changes you. You become more intentional with your energy. You listen more closely to how people respond, not just to what they say. You learn that respect shows itself in consistency, not apologies. You grow more comfortable walking away from dynamics that require you to over-explain your humanity. Distance does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop bleeding. It means you stop offering softness to those who handle it roughly. It means you recognize that love without respect is not love, it is endurance. Distance frees you from confusing loyalty with self-neglect. When words have been disrespected long enough, distance becomes the language of self-respect. It restores balance. It brings you back to yourself. It reminds you that your voice matters, even when certain people choose not to honor it. Distance creates room for relationships that listen, that respond with care, that meet you where you are without making you feel like too much. And in that space you begin to feel lighter. Conversations elsewhere feel easier. Your thoughts feel safer inside your own mind. You stop rehearsing explanations. You stop waiting for acknowledgement. You understand that the absence of respect is an answer in itself, and distance is simply how you reply to it without raising your voice. Some connections end not with conflict, but with awareness, and this kind of ending is the quietest and the most permanent. There is no argument that marks the moment, no final explosion of words, no dramatic goodbye. Instead, there is a slow, steady realization that settles into your body before it ever reaches your mind. You begin to notice how you feel after interactions. You notice the heaviness, the tension, the subtle exhaustion that lingers long after the conversation ends. Nothing obvious has gone wrong, yet something no longer feels right, and that awareness becomes impossible to ignore. At first, awareness whispers. It shows up as a small pause before you reply, a hesitation before you share something personal, a sense of holding back without knowing why. You tell yourself it is nothing, that all relationships have phases, that closeness naturally shifts. You try to push past it, to reconnect the way you used to, but the ease is gone. Where there was once safety, there is now caution. Where there was openness, there is now calculation. Awareness does not arrive to accuse, it arrives to reveal. These endings are often misunderstood because they do not fit the story people expect. Society teaches us that relationships end because someone did something wrong, said something unforgivable, crossed a clear line. But many connections fade because one person wakes up to a truth they were previously avoiding. They realize they are carrying more than their share. They realize they are always adjusting, excusing, understanding, while the other remains unchanged. Awareness strips away the fantasy and leaves you face to face with reality. With awareness comes honesty, and honesty can be unsettling. You start admitting things to yourself that you once dismissed. You admit that you feel unseen. You admit that your growth has created distance. You admit that the connection survives more on memory than on present experience. This is not blame. It is clarity. Awareness does not require you to villainize the other person. It simply asks you to stop lying to yourself. One of the hardest parts of these endings is that nothing is overtly broken. The person may still be kind in their way. They may still show up occasionally. They may not mean harm. But intention does not erase impact. Awareness teaches you that good intentions do not automatically create healthy dynamics. You can care about someone and still recognize that the connection no longer supports who you are becoming. There is a quiet grief in this realization. You grieve not just the person, but the version of yourself that existed within that connection. You remember who you were when it began, what you needed then, how it once fit. Awareness forces you to confront how much you have changed. It asks you to honor that change, even when it means letting go of something familiar. This grief is subtle but deep because there is no clear villain to point to, no dramatic ending to justify the loss. Awareness also brings relief. Once you stop forcing yourself to stay, something inside you relaxes. You no longer feel obligated to maintain closeness that feels unnatural. You stop explaining your distance because you understand it yourself. Awareness replaces confusion with calm. You are no longer stuck asking why things feel off, These endings rarely come with announcements. You do not always sit the other person down and explain your awakening. Often the distance grows organically. You respond less. You share less. You invest your energy elsewhere. This is not manipulation or punishment. It is alignment. You are adjusting your life to match your understanding. Awareness changes how you move, not how loudly you speak. Some people will sense the shift and ask what changed. Others will not notice until the space is too wide to ignore. Either way, awareness prepares you to stand steady in your choice. You are no longer searching for reasons. You are no longer gathering evidence to justify yourself. You know that staying would require you to betray your own growth, and that knowledge is enough. Awareness teaches you that not all endings need explanations. Some truths are internal. Some realizations are not meant to be debated. When you try to explain awareness to someone who has not reached it, it often turns into conflict that never needed to exist. Awareness allows you to choose peace over persuasion. You no longer need to convince anyone that your experience is valid. As awareness deepens, you begin to see patterns more clearly. You recognize how often you made yourself smaller to preserve harmony. You see how you overlooked subtle disrespect because it was wrapped in familiarity. You notice how your intuition tried to warn you long before your mind caught up. Awareness reconnects you with that inner voice and teaches you to trust it again. These endings are gentle on the surface but firm at the core. Once awareness arrives fully, it rarely leaves. You cannot unsee what you have seen. You cannot unknow what you now understand. Even if you try to return to the way things were, the knowledge stays with you, quietly reminding you why the connection no longer fits. Awareness does not rush you, but it does not release you either. There is maturity in allowing connections to end this way. It shows that you have learned to listen to yourself without needing chaos to justify your decisions. You are no longer waiting for pain to force change. You are responding to insight. This is a sign of emotional growth, even though it may not feel triumphant or dramatic. Awareness also refines your future connections. You become more attentive to how relationships feel, not just how they look. You value mutual effort, emotional safety, and respect more deeply because you know the cost of ignoring their absence. Awareness sharpens your discernment and softens your expectations at the same time. Some connections are meant to end quietly because they were meant to teach you quietly. They were not mistakes. They were lessons that completed their purpose once you learned to see clearly. Awareness does not erase the good that once existed. It simply acknowledges that the season has changed. And so the connection loosens its grip, not because of anger, not because of betrayal, but because awareness has illuminated a truth you can no longer lie against, a truth that asks you to move forward with honesty, even if that movement is silent, even if no one else fully understands why the distance feels necessary, even if the ending exists only in your own heart. Peace grows where reaction no longer lives. And this is not a statement of passive resignation, but of conscious awakening. It is the recognition that every moment you spend reacting is a moment you relinquish your power, your clarity, your serenity. When we react impulsively, when we allow anger, frustration, or disappointment to dictate our behavior, we surrender to the chaos of the world, and in doing so, we invite the world to control our inner landscape. There is a profound difference between responding and reacting. Response is deliberate, rooted in awareness and understanding. Reaction is reflexive, fueled by emotion and habit. True peace emerges in the space between stimulus and response, in the quiet pause where the mind evaluates, the heart considers, and the soul whispers its guidance. In that space, one finds the power to choose dignity over drama, calm over commotion, and presence over distraction. When you stop reacting, you begin to see life differently. The provocations that once unsettled you lose their grip, their urgency, and their capacity to disturb. A cutting remark, a harsh critique, or even betrayal no longer has the power to define your day or your sense of self. This is not coldness, nor is it indifference. It is the cultivation of inner strength so deep and unshakable that external turbulence is met with a quiet, unmovable awareness. It is in this stillness that you begin to understand the subtle truth that the world does not have the authority to dictate your peace. Others may speak, act, or behave in ways that challenge your equilibrium, but the choice of whether to let that disturbance penetrate your mind remains yours. This is a sacred responsibility, a personal covenant with your own well-being, and it is in honoring it that the roots of peace take hold. In the beginning, this practice can feel unnatural. The impulse to argue, defend, or justify oneself is hardwired into our survival instincts. From childhood, we are taught to protect, to react, to assert. But as we grow, as awareness expands, we recognize that not every provocation demands engagement. Some battles are not ours to fight, some words not ours to carry, some energies not ours to absorb. The mind, when trained in stillness, begins to discern the difference between that which requires attention and that which can be allowed to pass like clouds across the sky. Reactions are often born of ego, fear, or habit. Silence, reflection, and measured response are born of understanding, courage, and mastery. When we live in reaction, we perpetuate cycles of conflict, frustration, and exhaustion. When we choose non-reaction, we open space for clarity, for insight, for authentic connection. This is not a withdrawal from life, but a deeper engagement with it. By refusing to react impulsively, you allow situations to unfold with their own rhythm, without your interference coloring the outcome. You grant yourself the gift of perspective, the luxury of time to consider, the freedom to act from choice rather than compulsion. You also send a message, though not a loud one, that you are governed by principles, not by the whims of circumstance. In relationships, this approach can be transformative. Conflicts that once escalated into arguments are diffused. Tensions that once festered into resentment are softened. People notice, sometimes unconsciously, that your calm is a force unto itself, and it inspires them to mirror that stillness. Peace grows where reaction no longer lives, because in that space, boundaries are clear and unyielding. When one is perpetually reactive, boundaries are porous, the emotions, demands, and opinions of others can enter unchecked. But with conscious restraint, with selective engagement, boundaries become defined not by hostility, but by self-respect. You understand that your energy is finite, that your attention is sacred, and that the preservation of your inner world is not selfish but essential. The world will always attempt to encroach upon your tranquility, whether through provocation, misunderstanding, or neglect, and the measure of your maturity lies in your ability to meet these challenges without surrendering your composure. It is important to recognize that choosing not to react is not the same as condoning harmful behavior. Silence is not compliance, it is discernment. By stepping back, by refusing to be drawn into conflict unnecessarily, you create a space where reason, compassion, and truth can emerge without distortion. Your absence of reaction is not absence of integrity. It is integrity in its most refined form. It signals that you will not compromise your peace for the sake of drama, that you will not feed the fire of negativity with your own energy, and that you honor the natural flow of life more than the temporary satisfaction of retribution. The cultivation of non-reaction is also deeply spiritual. It invites a connection with something larger than immediate circumstances, a recognition that life's unfolding is governed by patterns beyond our control. When you cease to react, you are no longer trapped in the endless cycle of cause and effect that binds so many to suffering. You observe rather than participate in unnecessary turmoil, and this observation brings freedom. The mind, once frenetic with anticipation and judgment, settles into clarity. The heart, once agitated by perceived slights or threats, opens to understanding. The soul, once clouded by attachment, experiences liberation. This is the essence of inner peace, the ability to remain unshaken in the midst of the storm, to walk through life with grace, and to touch others without absorbing their disturbance. Developing this capacity requires patience and practice. It is not instantaneous, it is a gradual transformation that asks for daily attention. Begin with small irritations, the minor provocations that previously elicited a reaction. Observe your instinctual response and consciously choose not to engage. Notice the difference in your energy when you allow a comment to pass without internalizing it, when you resist the temptation to respond to anger with anger, when you simply hold space for silence. Over time, these small acts accumulate into a resilient habit, a natural disposition toward composure. Eventually, even the most challenging interactions are met with a calm that surprises both yourself and those around you. Another aspect of peace that flourishes in non-reaction is self-awareness. As you refrain from reflexive engagement, you become attuned to the triggers that provoke you. You begin to understand your own emotional landscape, the vulnerabilities and biases that once dictated your behavior. Awareness without reaction allows for healing and growth, for rewriting the narrative that says your peace is contingent upon the actions of others. You reclaim responsibility for your own emotional state, and in doing so, you step fully into the realm of freedom. You understand that while you cannot control the world, you can control your response to it, and this understanding becomes the bedrock of lasting serenity. Non-reaction also nurtures compassion. When you stop reacting, you gain the space to consider others more deeply. You see their struggles, their misunderstandings, their fears, and you are able to engage with empathy rather than impulse. Compassion born of non-reaction is not weak. It is a strength that recognizes the humanity in others without sacrificing one's own integrity. You learn to distinguish between the person and the behavior, between the intention and the action, and this distinction transforms relationships. You become a stabilizing presence, a harbor of calm in the turbulence that surrounds many lives. It is important to remember that non-reaction is not avoidance of life's responsibilities. It is a disciplined engagement that refuses to be hijacked by unnecessary disturbance. Life will always present challenges, injustices, and provocations that demand thoughtful response. The difference lies in the quality of that response. Reaction is chaotic, untempered, and often regretful. Measured action, born of reflection and calm, is precise, impactful, and liberating. By choosing this path, you operate from a place of power rather than weakness, from clarity rather than confusion, from light rather than shadow. Peace grows where reaction no longer lives, because the energy once spent on turbulence is redirected toward creation, growth, and fulfillment. The energy wasted on arguments, on retaliation, on resentment can instead be invested in self-improvement, in meaningful work, in nurturing relationships, and in personal joy. When the mind is quiet and the heart is steady, creativity flourishes, insight deepens, and life unfolds with a richness that reaction cannot offer. You find that challenges are not obstacles to your happiness, but opportunities to exercise patience, discernment, and resilience. Furthermore, the practice of non-reaction encourages a broader perspective. When you are no longer immediately consumed by offense or disturbance, you are able to see situations in their totality. You notice patterns, understand motivations, and perceive consequences with clarity. Decisions made from this space are wiser, more strategic, and more aligned with your values. You are no longer pulled into the drama of the moment, but act from a place of foresight and integrity. Your life becomes less about surviving external chaos and more about cultivating inner harmony. Ultimately, peace that grows where reaction no longer lives is a profound gift to yourself and to the world. It radiates outward in subtle but unmistakable ways. People are drawn to the calm presence, the unshakable center, the quiet confidence that comes from mastery over one's impulses. Conflicts are diffused, misunderstandings clarified, and environments transformed by the simple act of refusing to participate in needless turmoil. You become a vessel of stability, a source of inspiration, and a testament to the power of conscious choice. To live without reaction is to embrace life fully, without being ensnared by it. It is to witness the unfolding of events without allowing them to dictate your inner weather. It is to honor your own energy, protect your boundaries, cultivate wisdom, and practice compassion. It is to walk through life with a steady heart, a calm mind, and an unwavering commitment to peace. It is the quiet revolution that begins within and echoes outward, shaping the world not through force, but through presence, integrity, and the unyielding choice to remain undisturbed. Peace grows where reaction no longer lives, and in choosing this path, one discovers the richness of life unencumbered by constant agitation, the joy of presence untouched by turmoil, and the strength of a soul rooted in serenity rather than in struggle. Each moment of restraint, each pause before responding, each deliberate act of non-engagement becomes a seed from which resilience, clarity, and tranquility flourish. Life is not diminished by silence, it is deepened, enriched, and transformed by it. As you continue this journey, remember that non-reaction is both shield and compass. It shields you from unnecessary conflict, emotional drain, and misdirected energy. It guides you toward actions that are meaningful, relationships that are authentic, and experiences that nourish your spirit. The less you react, the more you live consciously. The less you react, the more the currents of life align with your inner rhythm. The less you react, the more your peace becomes a living force, shaping not only your own existence but influencing the world around you in subtle and profound ways.